Hi, welcome to Milk Steaming and Workflow. In this video, I'll cover the basic techniques for steaming milk and then combining milk steaming with our 12-step espresso preparation process. When we steam milk for espresso drinks, we are raising its temperature and also changing its texture. Raising the temperature of milk will increase its perceived sweetness by breaking down lactose into glucose and galactose, which are simpler sugars that have a higher perceived sweetness. Heating up the milk with steam allows us to change its texture by using the kinetic energy of the steam coming out of the steam wand to incorporate air into the milk and create tiny microscopic bubbles, or a texture that we call microfoam. Most espresso stations will have two pitcher sizes that look like this. There's a 12-ounce pitcher that's used for smaller drinks like cappuccinos, cortados, and macchiatos, and a larger 20-ounce pitcher that's typically used for lattes. If you're brand new to steaming milk, I definitely recommend practicing with the larger pitcher and larger quantities of milk first, because you'll find that smaller quantities of milk are much more challenging to steam correctly. They heat up much more quickly, and every step of the process has to be condensed into a shorter amount of time. So for our purposes today, I'll show you the steps for steaming milk on the larger 20-ounce pitcher, and we'll practice steaming milk for a latte. The first step in our milk steaming process is going to be filling our pitcher with the correct amount of milk. You definitely want to start with cold milk, not just because milk that's not chilled will go bad, but because you'll find that the steaming process is very temperature dependent. That is, there's a lot that needs to be done while the milk is still cold during the steaming process in order for it to be successful. Starting with the correct amount of milk in the pitcher is a really important part of the process, because you will find that you can't steam small quantities of milk. For smaller drinks, you'll inevitably have some milk waste, because the steaming process is very much dependent upon the volume of milk in the pitcher. On a typical pitcher like this, I would recommend treating the beginning of the spout as the max fill line. You wouldn't want to have your liquid higher than where the spout starts in your pitcher when you go to start steaming. On the other hand, there's also a minimum volume of milk that you need in your pitcher. On pitchers like this, I wouldn't recommend going much lower than, say, a finger's width, roughly, below where the pour spout starts. You'll find that it's pretty difficult, maybe even impossible, to steam such small volumes of milk properly. And when you work with the smaller pitchers for cappuccinos and cortados and so on, the fill line rule is basically the same. You don't go higher than where the spout starts, or much lower than a finger's width below where the spout starts. Now that we have the right amount of milk in our pitcher, the next step is to purge the steam wand. As the steam sits, it condenses into liquid water, and we need to remove that liquid water from the line to the steam wand before we actually start steaming the milk. The proper technique for purging the steam wand is to take the dedicated steam wand towel, which I have folded in quarters and lightly damp. I'm going to use this to just gently grasp the steam wand and open the steam wand valve so that it shoots out that liquid water and steam starts coming out as well. You don't want to tightly grip the steam wand, because that steam will go through your steam wand towel and potentially burn your hand, so be careful during this process. And it's worth noting again that you only want to move or touch the steam wand on the silicone gripper, never the bare metal. Next, we need to pick up and hold our pitcher with a safe and comfortable grip. There are differences of opinion on this. I prefer to hold the pitcher with my dominant hand and then control the steam valve with my non-dominant hand. You can do it the other way around if you prefer, that's fine. One thing that I definitely do recommend, though, is that you have a grip on the pitcher that doesn't require you to hold the pitcher by the body. So you should have a grip on the handle. The reason is that the body of the pitcher is going to heat up during the steaming process, and it's going to become uncomfortable to hold. So during the steaming process, we have one hand mainly holding the pitcher, and the other hand is going to be controlling the steam valve and also feeling the side of the pitcher for temperature. Next, we're going to insert our steam wand into our pitcher of milk, and we're going to pay attention to a few things to position the steam wand correctly. One, I recommend hooking the steam wand around the spout to give you a position of stability. And I recommend angling the steam wand so that it's just off-center. So if we look down at the top of our pitcher, we're not aiming the steam wand so it's around the outside or directly in the center. We're aiming it somewhere in between the center and the outside edge of the pitcher. We also really need to pay attention to the depth of the tip of the steam wand below the surface of the milk. That's going to play a really important role in the steaming process. The tip of the steam wand is separated by a little line. Before you turn on the steam, that line should be just below the surface of the milk. When I go to position the steam wand in the pitcher, I like to use the spout as a point to stabilize the steam wand, and I also like to use my hand that's going to be used for controlling the steam valve and feeling for the temperature. As another way of stabilizing the pitcher, I put it on the drip tray, and that gives me another kind of tactile sense of the position of the pitcher relative to the steam wand. So we'll start with the tip of the steam wand submerged below the surface of the milk. And then the next step is to open the steam valve to full pressure. You'll find that it's difficult and even impossible to steam milk with less than full pressure, so it's important that the valve is all the way open during the steaming process. Once we open the steam valve, we'll see the force of the steam coming out of the steam wand start to move the milk around in our pitcher. And the next step is to slowly and carefully lower the pitcher relative to the steam wand just a little bit, and this is going to start a stage that's called aeration. What's happening during aeration is the force of the steam coming out is basically sucking air in from the surface of the milk and incorporating it into the liquid milk. This is what's going to create that nice microfoam texture. Aeration is really important because the amount of time that we aerate the milk and the point in the process at which we aerate will effectively determine the texture of the resulting milk. The longer that we aerate, the more of that microfoam we will produce. It's also really important that we pay attention to the time at which we aerate. We have to aerate while the milk is still relatively cool. If we wait until the milk is heated up, we won't be able to produce those really fine bubbles that make microfoam. During the aeration process, it's really important and helpful to pay attention to the auditory cues. As you start aerating, you will hear a sound that's kind of like a cat hissing or paper ripping, and this tells you that the aeration is happening, that the steam is sucking in air from the surface and incorporating it into the liquid milk. So to start the aeration process, you're just going to slowly lower the pitcher and listen for that paper ripping sound. Once you hear that sound, you're just going to keep the pitcher in place for about 4 to 6 seconds, depending upon the type of milk that you're working with and the drink that you're making. And then to end the aeration process, you're just going to reverse that. You're going to raise the pitcher up just slightly so that the tip of the steam wand is submerged in the milk, not so much that it touches the bottom of the pitcher, just so it's submerged in the milk, and you should hear that paper ripping sound stop. At this point, you're going to keep the tip of the steam wand submerged below the surface of the milk and aimed just slightly off center, and that should help produce a circular kind of whirlpool motion in the pitcher, and that's going to help incorporate the air that you just introduced. You're going to use your free hand to feel the side of the pitcher for temperature, and this part of the process should be pretty much silent. If during this part of the process you hear a kind of rumbling or screeching sound like this, that's a pretty good indication that you haven't incorporated enough air during the aeration process. So on your next round, I would recommend aerating for a little bit longer, and that should fix the problem. At this point in the process, we're just letting that whirlpool motion in our pitcher even out the texture of the milk, and we're letting the temperature rise to our target. I would recommend a target of about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a good idea to use a thermometer to check that. If you're just using your hand, 140 degrees is going to be uncomfortable to touch for more than a second or two at a time. So once your milk reaches that point where the pitcher is uncomfortable to touch for more than a second or two at a time, you want to immediately close the steam valve and carefully lower your pitcher and set it on the counter. Each time you use the steam wand, it's important to clean it immediately afterwards. The proper technique for doing that is to take your dedicated towel for the steam wand and wrap it around the steam wand, purge the valve, and then wipe the steam wand. So now we have a pitcher of steamed milk, and most baristas, before they use this in a drink, will go through a grooming process. The grooming process basically evens out the texture a little bit. If you have any large bubbles in the foam in your pitcher, you can gently tap the pitcher on the counter. Another technique that baristas often use in grooming is to swirl the milk in their pitchers, something like this. This helps even out the texture a little bit, and it can be really beneficial to do, especially if you are not able to pour the milk immediately after steaming it. Let's say you're waiting for your shot to finish extracting. This technique will help keep the liquid and foam incorporated so that they don't come out as two separate layers in your pitcher. When we've steamed the milk correctly, we should have a nice smooth texture with no large visible bubbles. It should be apparent that the volume of the milk has increased because we have added air and foamed the milk, but the texture should be kind of smooth and shiny on the surface. It should look almost like wet paint or melted ice cream. So So just to recap those steps, we'll start with the correct amount of cold milk in our pitcher. We'll purge and clean the steam wand, and then insert the steam wand so that the tip of the steam wand is submerged below the surface of the milk. At that point, we'll open the steam valve to full pressure, and we'll slowly lower the pitcher and listen for that paper ripping sound that indicates aeration is happening. We'll let that happen for about 4 to 6 seconds, and then slowly raise the pitcher back up. And at that point, we'll look for a whirlpool motion in our milk and feel for temperature. Once the pitcher is too hot to touch for more than a second or two at a time, we'll close the steam valve, carefully lower our pitcher, and thoroughly clean and purge the steam wand, and then groom our milk in our pitcher until we are ready to pour our drink. When we're creating drinks that have espresso and steamed milk combined, an efficient workflow will take advantage of the time during which the espresso is extracting to steam the milk. This way, the two ingredients are basically done at the same time. In order to have that smooth, efficient workflow, I would recommend starting the process of preparing an espresso drink, like a latte, by prepping your milk pitcher with cold milk first, and then running through the steps to start your espresso extraction. This means that as soon as you start your espresso extraction, you can start steaming your milk. In this way, the two ingredients will be done at approximately the same time. Let's conclude by running through this workflow together and preparing a latte. I'm going to start by preparing a clean pitcher with cold milk. Then I'm going to select a vessel from the top of the bar. I'm going to remove my portafilter and flush the group head. I'll clean the portafilter basket with my dedicated towel. I'll tear out my scale to check my dose, and then grind coffee. I'll go through my distribution step, and then tamp firmly and evenly. I'll clean the rim of the basket and insert it in the group head, and start the group head immediately, positioning a shot glass and scale below. And now I can start steaming my milk by purging my steam wand, and then inserting the steam wand and opening the valve. I'll lower the pitcher to listen for aeration. And then raise the pitcher to end aeration. My espresso extraction and milk steaming are done at the same time. I'm going to purge and clean the steam wand, and then pour my shot into my vessel. I'm going to groom my milk, and then pour the milk into the espresso, creating the latte. Then I'm going to clean my milk pitcher, remove my portafilter, and flush the group head. I'll knock out spent grounds, and clean the portafilter basket, and return the portafilter to the group head. A good, efficient workflow should allow you to produce espresso and milk drinks like lattes from start to finish in about 2 minutes or less. So that covers milk steaming and workflow. In another video, I'll cover latte art. I would recommend practicing steaming milk before moving on to that step, because you'll find it much easier to produce latte art if you already have a solid foundation in producing good microfoam texture.